My son raised his wine glass at Thanksgiving dinner and toasted his father-in-law as his real dad, while I sat there watching 32 years of fatherhood get erased in front of our entire family. The next morning, I called Elena Santos from Santos Realty and put our house on the market without telling anyone, because sometimes the only way to respond to ultimate disrespect is to disappear from the lives of people who've forgotten what you mean to them. If you've ever been replaced by someone richer while you're sitting right there, if you've ever had your own child choose money over the man who raised them, grab some coffee and buckle up. This story's got more heartbreak than a country ballad, but the ending might surprise you. And if you like tales about people who think family loyalty can be bought and sold like stocks, hit that subscribe button for Grandpa's Diaries. I've got more stories about discovering your worth when the people closest to you try to convince you that you're worthless. I'm always here with fresh wisdom about knowing when to fight for relationships and when to walk away with your dignity intact. The Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be a celebration of family at the house where I'd raised Ryan alone after his mother Maggie died when he was 14. I'd spent 2 days preparing Maggie's traditional recipes, her famous stuffing, her grandmother's sweet potato casserole, and the apple pie that had been Ryan's favorite since childhood. Ashley had invited her parents Richard and Patricia Blackwood, and I was looking forward to hosting them in the home where Ryan and I had shared 18 Thanksgivings together. The Blackwoods arrived in their Mercedes looking like they were attending a charity function rather than a family dinner. Richard was perfectly dressed in his expensive suit, carrying himself with the confidence that comes from running a Fortune 500 company and belonging to the kind of social circles where people measure success by net worth rather than character. Patricia was equally polished, making polite conversation about the charming house while her eyes cataloged everything that didn't meet her standards of luxury. Dinner conversation was strained as the Blackwoods dominated discussion, with talk about their recent European vacation, their country club's renovation, and Richard's latest business acquisitions. Ryan hung on every word, asking detailed questions about investment strategies and networking opportunities, while I sat there feeling like a spectator at my own family dinner. "Dad's always been interested in business," Ashley said to her parents, referring to Ryan in ways that suggested I wasn't worth including in the conversation. The moment that destroyed everything came when Richard raised his glass for what I assumed would be a traditional Thanksgiving toast about gratitude and family. "I want to thank everyone who made this wonderful dinner possible," he began, looking around the table with the satisfaction of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "And I especially want to thank Ashley for finding such a remarkable husband. Ryan, you're everything I could have hoped for in a son." The words felt ominous, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. That's when Ryan stood up, his own glass raised, his face glowing with the kind of pride I hadn't seen him direct toward me in years. "Actually, Richard, I need to thank you," he said, his voice carrying across the dining room where his mother's china and family photos bore witness to his betrayal. "You've been more of a father to me than I ever had growing up. You've taught me about success, about building wealth, about becoming the kind of man who can provide for his family. You're the real dad I never had." He clinked glasses with Richard while I sat there in stunned silence, watching my son erase 3 decades of single fatherhood with a few carefully chosen words. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation while I processed what had just happened. Ryan continued chatting with Richard about business opportunities and investment advice, while Ashley and Patricia discussed holiday plans that apparently didn't include me. I was invisible at my own table, erased from my son's life story by someone who'd known him for 3 years compared to my 32 years of loving him through every challenge and triumph. When the Blackwoods finally left, Ryan hugged Richard goodbye like a son saying farewell to his beloved father, while I cleaned dishes and wondered how I'd raised someone capable of such casual cruelty. Ryan wasn't always someone who could publicly disown his father in favor of a richer replacement. He was my little shadow, the boy who followed me around the house asking endless questions about electrical work, helping me organize my tools, and proudly telling his teachers that his daddy could fix anything that was broken. After Maggie died from breast cancer when Ryan was 14, we became a team of 2 against the world, learning to cook together, sharing household responsibilities, and supporting each other through the grief that threatened to overwhelm us both. Those early years after losing Maggie were the hardest but also the most precious time in my relationship with Ryan. He'd been devastated by his mother's death, and I'd worked overtime to be both father and mother to a grieving teenager who needed more emotional support than I knew how to provide. We'd have long talks in the evenings about missing Maggie, about his fears for the future, and about his dreams of making something of himself that would make his parents proud. "I want to be successful like Mom wanted," he'd tell me, and I'd assure him that success meant being a good person, not just making money. I worked double shifts and took on weekend electrical jobs to pay for Ryan's college education without loans, determined that my son would have opportunities I'd never had. When he got accepted to law school, I refinanced the house to cover his expenses because I believed education was the best gift I could give him. Ryan seemed grateful for the sacrifices, calling home regularly and visiting for holidays with appreciation for everything I was doing to support his dreams. "Dad, I know how hard you're working for me," he'd say during those college years. "I promise I'll make it worth it." Ryan's law school graduation was one of the proudest days of my life. Watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown, knowing that my electrical work had paid for every credit hour and every textbook, made all the sacrifice feel worthwhile. He introduced me to his professors and classmates as the man who made this possible, and I felt like the richest father in the world despite having an empty bank account. "Look what we accomplished together," I told him after the ceremony, and he hugged me with tears in his eyes. When Ryan started working at Blackwood & Associates, I was happy he'd found a position at a prestigious law firm that would launch his career. He'd talk excitedly about learning from experienced attorneys, handling complex cases, and building a reputation in corporate law. I didn't mind that his new job meant fewer phone calls and visits. I understood that young professionals needed to focus on establishing themselves. "This is just the beginning, Dad," he'd tell me. "Once I prove myself here, the sky's the limit." Meeting Ashley was the beginning of subtle changes in Ryan that I attributed to normal relationship development, rather than growing embarrassment about his background. She was beautiful, intelligent, and came from the kind of wealthy family that could open doors for ambitious young lawyers. But I noticed that Ryan started talking differently around Ashley's parents, using business terminology I'd never heard him use, and discussing investment strategies that seemed far removed from the practical financial lessons I'd taught him growing up. The engagement announcement should have been a joyful family moment, but it felt more like a business merger than a love story. The engagement party was held at the Blackwood Country Club, where I felt out of place among the lawyers, doctors, and business executives who made up their social circle. Ryan introduced me to Ashley's family as someone who worked in electrical services, a description so vague it could have meant I was a repair technician rather than a master electrician who'd owned my own business for 20 years. When I tried to correct the impression and mention my company, Ryan quickly changed the subject to avoid dwelling on details that apparently embarrassed him in front of people whose approval had become more important than his father's pride. The changes in Ryan became more obvious after his engagement to Ashley, as he worked harder to fit into the Blackwood family's social expectations and distance himself from reminders of his blue-collar upbringing. He started referring to his childhood as modest rather than acknowledging the specific sacrifices I'd made as a single father, and he'd changed the subject when Ashley's family asked about his background. "Ryan prefers to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past," Ashley would explain when her parents showed curiosity about how I'd raised him alone. My visits to Ryan and Ashley's expensive apartment became increasingly uncomfortable as they filled their home with furniture and artwork that seemed designed more to impress visitors than create a comfortable living space. Ryan would give me tours like I was a guest rather than his father, pointing out designer pieces and mentioning their cost in ways that suggested I should be impressed by their financial success. "We're really building something here, Dad," he'd say, but something felt more like a showroom than a home where family would be welcome. The most painful change was how Ryan began editing his personal history when talking to his new social circle, reframing stories about our close relationship after Maggie's death as examples of his early independence, rather than evidence of our loving bond. Tales about cooking dinner together became anecdotes about learning self-sufficiency young, and our tradition of working on electrical projects together was transformed into Ryan having entrepreneurial influences, rather than a father who'd taught him valuable skills while spending quality time together. Holiday gatherings shifted from our simple family traditions to elaborate productions designed to meet Blackwood family standards. The casual Thanksgiving dinners we'd shared for years, where Ryan would help me prepare Maggie's recipes while we talked about everything and nothing, were replaced by formal meals with specific protocols about conversation topics and behavioral expectations. The Blackwoods have certain customs, Ashley would explain when I asked about changes to traditions that had been meaningful to Ryan and me for decades. Ryan's wedding was beautiful, but felt more like a business networking event than a family celebration. I was seated with distant relatives and family friends, while Ryan mingled with Ashley's family's important connections and business associates. During his speech, Ryan thanked everyone who helped make this day possible, and specifically acknowledged Richard Blackwood for guidance and mentorship. But he never mentioned me or the sacrifices I'd made to give him the education and opportunities that had led to this moment. I felt like a stranger at my own son's wedding. The birth of my grandson Jake should have brought us closer together, but instead it highlighted how much distance Ryan had created between his old life and his new one. He hired nannies and enrolled Jake in exclusive programs, creating schedules so rigid that spontaneous grandparent visits became impossible. "We want Jake to have every advantage," Ryan would explain when I suggested simple activities like teaching the boy basic electrical skills or sharing stories about his grandmother Maggie. The Blackwoods have established educational philosophies that will benefit his development. The final warning sign before the Thanksgiving disaster was Jake's third birthday party, where I was introduced to other parents as Ryan's father, without any additional context about our relationship or my role in Ryan's upbringing. When one of the mothers asked about my profession, Ryan answered for me, saying I was retired from electrical work, in a tone that suggested my career had been less significant than it actually was. Watching my son minimize my life's work, to avoid any association that might embarrass him in front of people whose opinions had become more important than his father's feelings, was heartbreaking preparation for the public rejection that would come 6 months later at our family's Thanksgiving table. I spent the night after Thanksgiving sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and staring at family photos that suddenly felt like evidence of a relationship that had been dying slowly for years without my realizing it. Ryan's words echoed in my mind, the real dad I never had. While I looked at pictures of birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, and holiday celebrations where I'd been present for every milestone he'd achieved. The casual cruelty of being replaced by someone who'd known my son for 3 years compared to my 32 years of single fatherhood made sleep impossible. At 7 a.m., I called Elena Santos from Santos Realty, a woman I'd done electrical work for 2 years earlier when she'd bought her first house. "Elena, this is Frank Coleman. I know it's early, but I need to put my house on the market immediately. How soon can you come over to discuss listing it?" Her surprise was obvious. She knew I'd lived in the house for over 20 years and had seemed settled in the neighborhood, but her professionalism kicked in quickly. "I can be there in an hour, Frank. Is everything okay?" Elena arrived with contracts and a laptop, ready to handle the business of selling the house where I'd raised Ryan and created memories with Maggie that suddenly felt tainted by my son's public rejection. "Frank, are you sure about this?" she asked while taking photos of the living room where Ryan had opened Christmas presents and brought friends home from school. "This is a big decision, especially right after a holiday. Maybe you want to think about it for a few days." But I'd done my thinking during the sleepless night, and I knew I couldn't stay in a house filled with reminders of a son who saw me as an embarrassment. The real estate market was strong, and Elena explained that houses in my neighborhood were selling quickly to young families attracted by good schools and established communities. "We could probably have this sold within a month," she said, reviewing comparable sales and market trends. "But Frank, where will you go? Do you have plans for after the sale?" Her questions forced me to think beyond my immediate need to escape, but honestly, I didn't care where I ended up as long as it was far from people who measured my worth by my bank account rather than my character. By 10 a.m., Elena had uploaded listing photos and created marketing materials for the house that had been my sanctuary for 2 decades. Looking at professional photos of rooms where Ryan and I had shared countless conversations, meals, and quiet evenings watching television, I felt like I was viewing artifacts from someone else's life. "The listing will go live this afternoon," Elena explained. "I expect we'll have showing requests by tomorrow morning. The kitchen renovation you did last year really adds value, and the electrical work throughout the house is obviously professional grade." The first call came from Ryan at 2 p.m., his voice a mixture of confusion and panic when he realized what I'd done. "Dad, Ashley's mother just called and said she saw our house listed online. What's going on? Why didn't you tell us you were thinking about selling?" The entitlement in his voice, assuming he deserved advance notice about my decisions after publicly rejecting me as his father, made my anger flare again. "Ryan, I'm downsizing," I said calmly. "Since you have a real dad now, you don't need to worry about your fake dad's living arrangements." The silence that followed my words stretched long enough for Ryan to understand exactly what I was referencing. "Dad, about what I said yesterday? I was just trying to show appreciation for Richard's mentorship. It wasn't meant to diminish our relationship." His attempt to minimize the damage felt as hollow as his original toast had felt cruel. "Ryan," I said quietly, "when you toast someone as your real dad while your actual father is sitting 3 feet away, that's not appreciation. That's replacement. And if Richard Blackwood is really your father now, then you won't miss Frank Coleman when he's gone." I hung up before he could respond, knowing that some wounds are too deep to heal with explanations and excuses, and some betrayals are too public to forgive with private apologies. Within 48 hours of listing the house, Elena had scheduled 6 showings and received 2 serious inquiries from families eager to move into the neighborhood before the spring buying season. "Frank, this is unprecedented interest," she told me, while coordinating appointments and reviewing offers. "But I have to ask again, are you absolutely certain about this decision? Once we accept an offer, there's no going back." Her concern was professional but also personal. She'd seen enough hasty real estate decisions to recognize when someone might be acting from emotion rather than logic. The first family to tour the house was a young couple with twin toddlers who reminded me of Ryan and Maggie when we'd first bought the property, 23 years earlier. They loved the backyard where I'd taught Ryan to throw a football, the kitchen where we'd cooked together after Maggie died, and the basement workshop where I'd stored electrical equipment and taught my son basic repair skills. "This house has such good energy," the wife commented while her children ran through rooms that had once echoed with Ryan's laughter. "You can tell it's been a happy family home." Ryan called every day that week, his messages growing more desperate as he realized I was serious about leaving and wouldn't be swayed by apologies or explanations. "Dad, we need to talk about this face to face," he said in one voicemail. "I know I hurt your feelings, but selling the house is an extreme reaction to a misunderstanding. Let's have dinner and work this out like family." The word family, from someone who'd publicly declared I wasn't his real father, felt like salt in an open wound. Ashley tried a different approach, calling to express concern about my impulsive decision-making and suggesting I might benefit from counseling to work through whatever emotional crisis was driving my behavior. "Frank, we all say things we don't mean when we're trying to be polite in social situations," she said in her most diplomatic voice. "Ryan was just being gracious to my father. He never intended to hurt you." Her attempt to reframe Ryan's public rejection as accidental rudeness rather than deliberate cruelty showed how little she understood about the depth of betrayal I'd experienced. The house sold in 8 days to a family from California who were relocating for work and needed to close quickly. Their cash offer was actually above asking price, giving me the financial freedom to disappear completely and start fresh somewhere Ryan and his new family couldn't find me easily. "This is happening fast, Frank," Elena warned during the contract signing. "Are you sure you have somewhere to go? Moving across country without a solid plan can be risky for someone our age." But risk felt better than staying in a place where I'd always be reminded of how little my sacrifices had meant to the son I'd raised alone. Elena's concern for my welfare extended beyond her professional obligations as my realtor. Over coffee after finalizing the sale paperwork, she asked thoughtful questions about my plans and seemed genuinely worried about my emotional state. "Frank, I've been in real estate for 15 years and I've seen people make dramatic life changes for all kinds of reasons," she said gently. "But running away from family problems rarely solves them permanently. Have you considered that your son might genuinely regret what he said and want to make things right?" But Elena didn't understand the accumulation of small humiliations and dismissals that had led to Ryan's public rejection of me as his father. The Thanksgiving toast wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of growing embarrassment about his blue-collar background and single father who didn't fit into his new social circle. "Elena, some things can't be unsaid," I explained. "When your child chooses money over the man who raised him, when he publicly declares that someone else is his real father, that's not a mistake or a misunderstanding. That's a decision about what kind of person he wants to be, and I don't want to be around to watch him become someone I don't recognize." By the end of November, I had 30 days to pack 23 years of memories and decide what kind of life I wanted to build without the son who'd been the center of my world since Maggie died. Elena offered to help with the logistics of moving and storage, but more importantly, she offered friendship during a transition that felt like grieving for someone who was still alive, but had chosen to become a stranger. 2 weeks before closing on the house, Elena surprised me with a proposition that changed everything about my post-Ryan future. "Frank, I know this might sound crazy, but I've been thinking about your situation," she said over coffee at the diner where we'd started meeting regularly to discuss moving logistics. "I have a friend who owns a small resort in Montana. Mountain cabins, fishing guides, the kind of place where guests need electrical maintenance and someone who can fix anything that breaks. He's been looking for a live-in handyman, and the job comes with a cabin and enough work to keep busy without feeling overwhelmed. The Montana opportunity felt like a gift from the universe, offering exactly what I needed: distance from painful memories, meaningful work that would use my skills, and a chance to build a new life in a place where no one knew about my ungrateful son or my failed relationship with the boy I'd raised alone. The owner's name is Jack Morrison, and he's a retired Marine who values hard work and integrity over social status," Elena explained. "I think you two would get along well, and the mountains might be exactly what you need for healing." Elena's personal interest in my welfare had grown beyond professional courtesy into something that felt like genuine friendship, and I was starting to realize that her concern for my future might include feelings that went deeper than realtor-client relationships. "Frank, I hope this doesn't sound inappropriate, but I've really enjoyed our conversations these past few weeks," she said carefully. "You're going through a difficult time, and I don't want to complicate things, but I'd like to stay in touch after you move. Maybe visit Montana sometime if you're open to that." The idea of Elena visiting Montana, of having someone in my new life who understood why I'd needed to leave the old one behind, felt like the first hopeful thought I'd had since Ryan's Thanksgiving betrayal. She was intelligent, kind, and treated me with the respect that my own son had forgotten how to show. "Elena, I'd like that very much," I told her, feeling something lighter than the grief and anger that had consumed me for weeks. "Maybe fresh mountain air and good company are exactly what I need to remember who I am when I'm not trying to earn love from people who've forgotten how to give it." The closing on my house was surprisingly emotional, not because I regretted leaving, but because it represented the final chapter of the life I'd built with Maggie and Ryan. Walking through empty rooms one last time, I said goodbye to the dreams we'd shared and the hopes I'd invested in a son who'd chosen social climbing over family loyalty. But I also felt liberated from the weight of constantly trying to prove my worth to people who'd decided money was more valuable than love. Elena drove me to the airport for my flight to Montana, where Jack Morrison would pick me up and show me the cabin that would be my new home. "Frank, I know this feels like an ending," she said while we waited for my boarding call. "But maybe it's actually a beginning. Maybe Ryan's cruelty was the push you needed to discover what your own life could look like when you're not sacrificing everything for someone else's dreams." Her words resonated with a truth I was just beginning to understand. The hardest part of leaving wasn't saying goodbye to the house or even to Elena, who promised to visit within a month. The hardest part was accepting that the son I'd loved unconditionally for 32 years had become someone who could publicly reject his father for social advancement without apparent remorse. But as my plane lifted off toward Montana, and a new life that didn't revolve around earning anyone's approval, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my own future, instead of disappointment about my family's choices. Jack Morrison met me at the small airport with a handshake that felt like a commitment to mutual respect. And during the drive to the resort through mountain scenery that took my breath away, I realized that sometimes the worst thing someone does to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could happen to you. Ryan had set me free from a relationship that was slowly diminishing my sense of self-worth, and now I had the chance to discover who Frank Coleman could be when he wasn't trying to be someone else's version of a good father. 1 year later, I'm sitting on the porch of my cabin in Montana, reading an email from a private investigator that Ryan hired to find me, while Elena makes coffee in the kitchen we've shared since she moved here 6 months ago. The investigator's message includes a letter from Ryan full of regret and requests for reconciliation, explaining that his divorce from Ashley has helped him understand what really matters in life. According to the detective's report, Richard Blackwood's business collapsed in a fraud scandal. Ashley left Ryan for someone richer, and my son has apparently learned some expensive lessons about choosing money over family. Elena reads Ryan's letter with the objectivity of someone who loves me, but wasn't personally hurt by his betrayal. "What does your heart tell you, mi amor?" she asks, using the Spanish endearment she learned from the resort's Mexican cook. "Do you miss him enough to risk being hurt again? Or are you happy enough now to leave the past buried?" Her question cuts to the truth I've been avoiding. I am genuinely content for the first time in years, and I'm not sure I want to risk that peace for someone who might revert to old patterns when his life gets comfortable again. Our life in Montana is everything I never knew I wanted. I maintain the electrical systems for Jack's resort, while Elena manages the front desk and guest services, creating a partnership that works both professionally and personally. Our days are filled with meaningful work among people who appreciate competence and integrity over social status. Guests thank us for helping make their vacations memorable, and we've built friendships with neighbors who value character more than bank accounts. The resort has become more than a job. It's become a calling that uses my skills to help families create positive memories together. When I fix a cabin's electrical problem so a family can enjoy their vacation, or when Elena helps guests plan activities that bring them closer together, we're contributing to something meaningful rather than just earning money. "You're good at this because you understand what family should be," Jack told me recently. "People can tell when someone genuinely cares about their happiness instead of just doing a job." Looking back on that Thanksgiving dinner where Ryan called Richard Blackwood his real dad, I realize it was the moment that freed me to discover who I really am when I'm not trying to earn love from people who've forgotten how to value it. The son who rejected me did me a favor. He showed me that I deserved better treatment than I was accepting, and he motivated me to find people who would appreciate the love I have to offer. Sometimes the cruelest thing someone does to you becomes the kindest gift they could give you. And sometimes losing your family helps you find your real home in the hearts of people who choose to love you unconditionally.